Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 9 of the NPA here on Smogon. I am Jake, MajorBowman, joined by my good friend Cedric Talon this week. Cedric, how are you doing this fine afternoon?
I'm doing well. Looking forward to some very excellent matches from extremely talented players on the broadcast today. Going to be a great final week of the regular season of NPA.
Yeah, this is the final week that these teams have to make it into the playoffs. Only 4 teams advance out of 10 in this original stage of the tournament, and the race is pretty close. There's some pretty important matches on the line this week, both in terms of qualifying for playoffs and avoiding relegation as well. So high stakes here.
Yeah, definitely should be some pretty solid players on the cast today. But honestly, I think the highlight's definitely going to be to start off Polar Bear versus Panda Justin Tang. For those unfamiliar, Polar Bear Jishki, I believe, just got a top 8 at a regional, and of course, Panda Justin Tang has gotten a regional victory in this regulation. So definitely going to be some very hard hitters at the start of this broadcast.
Yeah, Gio was top 8 at Vancouver not too long ago, so fresh off a great run there. But of course, going up against now 3-time regional winner Tang, like you said, Cedric also has a win in the first regional of this current regulation. So two really, really great players that are having pretty good seasons overall, especially Polar Bear is 6-1 so far, which is a fantastic record in NPA. And so I'm really excited to see how these two players match up.
Yeah, I think Polar Bear at 6-1, ranked third overall in standings right now, and with a win this week would pretty much guarantee at least third, possibly passing Fede if he loses. But of course, Michael Derbesti, fresh off of a regional win, and I believe pretty close to clutching first place overall in the league, depending on how his and Fede match the result of their match this week. But yeah, a lot of pride on the line for Polar Bear, and I think honestly Justin as well. He has a 3-3 record at the moment, which for him isn't that crazy good. But he and Gio actually decided to pair up this week. They requested their managers make sure that they're slot against each other. So a bit of a pride match between the both of them, just trying to see who's going to come out on top here.
Not only pride and a possible, spot in the MVP contention for Polar Bear, but Polar Bear's team, I believe, needs to win this week in order to make it to the playoffs. Is that right, Cedric?
Yeah, I believe there's a not a three-way tie, but effectively the Blackthorn City Blades are at 24 points, and then the Asukuna Samurais and Slateport City Cruisers are tied at 22 points. Geo repping the Cruisers, so if they're able to win and the Blades lose, that guarantees a spot in the top 4 playoffs. And then if the Samurais lose and the Cruisers win, then yeah, basically a lot is in Cruisers. A lot is out of Cruisers' hands. Unfortunately, they're ranked outside of the 5th place right now. So if the other teams win, then I don't believe they'll have a chance to make the playoffs unless they just have a massive win differential. But yeah, very much dependent on Polar Bear's victory here for them to at least have a shot in making the playoffs and continuing in this NPA season for them.
All right, well, let's just jump right into this first match between Polar Bear and Panda. Gio Sitchke, Justin Tang, their teams represented there. Gio mixing it up from his Vancouver team. We do not see the Koraidon this time around, but it is the Choice Specs Terrapagos with a bit of support from 3 different redirectors, which is pretty fun. Going up against a team that, if not, is identical to the San Antonio team, is very close.
Yeah, exactly. This is the team that Justin Tang won the San Antonio Regional Championship with. At the time, very innovative. We hadn't really seen a Calyrex Ice Rider composition like this, with the Roaring Moon and the Ogrepon Hearthflame and Amoonguss as double redirection, as well as Landorus Incarnate being uncommon at the time. But at this point in the metagame, it has stuck around this entirety of the second phase of Regulation G, so something that Geo should be pretty familiar with. And honestly, a lot of the sauce on Justin's team is the just absurd amount of bulk on all the Pokemon for them to be able to function in or out of Trick Room or Tailwind. But with Geo, being friends with Justin, having seen the exact EV spreads that Justin and Xilang Tang posted, that surprise factor might be a little bit less in Justin's favor as it was at regionals, and now in Polar Bear's favor.
I remember seeing the Ogrepon EVs when those were first released, and they're like almost max defense, which was shocking to me. But it makes a lot of sense on a team like this, like you said, that wants to operate kind of both in and out of Trick Room and has a lot of that flexibility. The Terra Water Landorus I thought was also pretty cool. A lot of people opted for Poison because it's a decent defensive typing, but of course powers up that Sludge Bomb. But Water being such a great defensive option, again, just adds a bit of flexibility that I think he managed to make use of very well.
Yeah, the Tear Water going to be really solid against the. I guess it's okay against. Honestly, it's not excellent in this matchup. I'm going to
Yeah.
walk back what I said there. It's decent in the Icy Wind on Fluttermane, but outside of that, doesn't really give you a lot leeway in this matchup. One thing I do want to point out is the Terra Fairy on the Calyrex Ice Rider.
Mm.
Geo going for the Dark type Urshifu, so being able to resist those. But there is, of course, Terrapagos Terrestrialization, where your Terra Starstorm is super effective against Terra type. So be on the lookout for Geo trying to force a Terrestrialization out early from Justin's Pokemon so that he can clean up later with the Terra Starstorm on the Terrapagos.
Well, let's jump right into game number 1 of our first of 3 matches here on the NPA stream. Again, we have Polar Bear on the bottom of your team on the Cruisers. Need to win to remain in playoff contention, facing off against Panda, Justin Tang on the far side here.
Yeah, going to be interesting seeing what the two players lead. Of course, as mentioned in the overview, Justin has a lot of speed control options, both the Tailwind and the Trick Room, being able to go fast or slow. However, one thing that really can be troublesome for the Trick Room mode is the Amoonguss on Polar Bear's team. How does Amoonguss typically thwart Justin's plans, do you think, here?
It's interesting because, you have the Ogerpon on Justin's side of the field, which is kind of one of the best Amoonguss answers that we have in the format. But that Ogerpon is decently well threatened by Polar Bear's own Ogerpon. Doesn't really want to be taking too many attacks from the Terrapagos itself. So if you're able to kind of get rid of that Follow Me Ogerpon, then the Amoonguss, especially in Trick Room, can kind of just put whatever it wants to sleep. I don't believe there are any safety goggles or Terra Grass on Justin's side. Of course, the Amoonguss will be immune to the spores and the rage powders, but I think if you've got Trick Room up in your Geo, you don't really care about the Amoonguss on the other side if you're just sleeping the partner there.
Yeah, definitely going to have to watch out on Geo's side for that Ogerpon Hearthflame. Could spell a lot of trouble. Deals really well with the Fluttermane on his side, which he does look to be leaning towards leading, but also has the bulk to be able to live an Ivy Cudgel from his own Ogerpon, which we saw on the San Antonio regional stream. So definitely something that might be on his mind that, at the onset of this team might not have been even going through his head. Just an option that the Ogerpon Hearthflame could live that attack.
I guess the benefit of it being so physically defensive is that it doesn't really have a whole lot stuck up for the Terrapagos. So if you're able to position the Terrapagos where you get a big Terra Starstorm off, if you've Terrestrialized being a spread attack hitting the thing next to the Ogerpon as well. But even without Terra, you go straight for that Terra Starstorm into the physically bulky Ogerpon, that could be enough too.
And we do see the leads come out. The restricted on both sides being led, the Terrapagos and the Calyrex Ice Rider, as well as Fluttermane and Ogerpon. So Fluttermane running the booster energy. I believe that I'm not sure if it's activated yet, but we're gonna basically assume that it is going to be speed, as we do see the activation. Yep, and it is going to be the speed booster, which won't be especially good against the basically the slower mode that Justin looks to have opted for. Taunt on the Fluttermane could be important, but yeah, the Ogerpon basically able to redirect any single target attacks. But yeah, going to be an interesting turn here.
The Fluttermane lead makes a lot of sense considering it should be outspeeding the booster speed Roaring Moon. So if you do want to, lead that, maybe taunt it to prevent any tailwinds or slow it down right off the bat. It is a nice tool here, and the taunt could come in handy against both of these Pokemon too. Like you said, if you want to stop Trick Room, you want to stop a possible Follow Me, it can be of great use. The Icy Wind, obviously not going to do much into the Calyrex, both in terms of damage and because of that clear amulet. But depending on how they're trained, it could make a speed difference for the Ogerpon.
Yep, see an immediate Moonblast into the Ogerpon, trying to chip it down, and because of all the bulk on the Ogerpon, Terrapagos actually outspeeding it, giving an indication a bit on how fast that Terrapagos is trained. Knocks out the Ogerpon in one hit with some help from the Fluttermane, taking that redirection threat out as the Calyrex Ice Rider answers back with its own Glacial Lance, going to be doing a lot of damage to the Fluttermane, while also breaking the Terra Shell and really lowering the HP of that offensive Terrapagos. As an Urshifu comes in, now able to threaten a Aqua Jet to knock out the Fluttermane. I believe, Justin is running the Aqua Jet on this variation of the team, but no close combat on this Urshifu, so the Terrapagos a little bit safer than it typically would be.
The power of the Terra Shell there too, that takes the Glacial Lance so well, and you're in a position where, because of the lack of close combat, if you want to Terrestrialize your Terrapagos, give it a little bit more bulk, Your Terra Shell's already been broken, so you don't really lose that anymore. And of course, there's no terrain on Justin's side of the field, so you don't ever need to save that Terrestrialization and the Terraform Zero ability to shut off any possible terrains. Also would activate the spread attack Terra Starstorm. Once you do Terrestrialize again, it becomes a spread move, which is really great. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to go for like a one-hit KO on either of these two Pokemon, especially the Urshifu, because again, Justin did train a lot of his Pokemon to be kind of absurdly bulky in a lot of scenarios, but this could be a huge chunk of damage here to kind of set up the late game.
Yeah, we see the Terrestrialization bursting forth from Geo's Terapagos, giving a substantial increase to HP. The Aqua Jet going to be knocking out the Flutter Mane there, preventing it from taunting the Calyrex Ice. That is what Geo went for, trying to stop a Trick Room potentially. But we see the Starstorm come out. Going to see an indication of the bulk on the Urshifu here, as the Starstorm does a pretty substantial chunk. Still definitely going to be in the range of a 2-hit KO, but very importantly, not 2-hit KOing Justin's Calyrex. So a bit of bulk on that Pokemon as well, as the Terapagos continues to go down even further. Now at 66 HP, about 1/4 of the HP remaining, but definitely in range for another Glacial Lance as the Ogerpon comes in on Geo's side.
This is tough because that Terra Starstorm did a big chunk to the Calyrex, but looks to be just short of a 2-hit KO. And if you do opt to go for something like the Follow Me, you're going to be able to redirect the Urshifu. Oh, do we see the Urshifu attack before Terapagos? Oh, it's Aqua Jet.
Yeah, we saw.
We don't know. Yeah, so if you're going to take the gamble that your Terapagos is faster than Urshifu, you actually don't even need to Follow Me. You can just go straight for like 2 attacks, like a Terra Starstorm plus Ivy Cudgel. And maybe that's info that, Geo knows. I've seen, these stats that Justin's posted. I'm banking on this Urshifu being slow and bulky just like the rest. And that can open you up for a much more offensive turn here.
Yep, we see the Ogerpon pressuring down the Pokemon on Justin's side. Aqua Jet doing a ton to the Ogerpon, 2-hit KOing with a critical hit as Ivy Cudgel goes into the protecting Calyrex Ice Rider, as the Terapagos is going to be free to take a knockout with the Terra Starstorm going into the Urshifu. So basically Justin indicating, okay, I'd at least like to take some damage onto this Ogerpon, break it sturdy, and get in one of my other Pokemon, though, even though it's pretty likely if the Terapagos stays in, I will be going down on the Urshifu. Urshifu faints, and we're going to see what he has in the back, Justin. Could be one of Landorus, Amoonguss, or Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon definitely going to be a stronger depending on the speed training on this Calyrex Ice Rider. I think at the regional it had a bit of speed, but wasn't outspeeding a Jolly Ogerpon. We'll see if Justin has had the foresight, although with the Terrestrialization he'll probably live the Ivy Cudgel. But really this could be a slam dunk turn with a Tailwind Glacial if it is a faster Calyrex Ice Rider.
Yeah, I think the Calyrex really just needs to be faster than the Terapagos once Tailwind goes up, because like you said, if you do opt for the Terrestrialization on the Calyrex, you should be able to survive the Ivy Cudgel pretty well, and then as long as you get the attack off before Terapagos' Terra Starstorm, which would become super effective if the Calyrex Terrestrializes, just thanks to the mechanics of Terra Starstorm specifically, you're able to knock out the Terapagos with one more Glacial Lance. And then you've got a 2-to-1 Pokemon advantage, but your 2 Pokemon are a +2 Calyrex and a Roaring Moon at full HP. So if you're able to get that play off this turn, I think you're in a really strong spot.
We do see the Tailwind come out, and no Terrestrialization might be a hint of what we're about to see, as the Calyrex does outspeed the Ogerpon, taking a Glacial Lance, knocking out the Terapagos and the Ogerpon in one turn, and the as-1 Chilling Neigh boost going to give the Calyrex a +2 in its attack stat, with 3 turns remaining and a full HP Roaring Moon. Really just a excellently sequenced endgame here from Justin.
Yeah, I like that you called out no Terra means it's probably safe to assume that Calyrex is going to be quicker there. So maybe an adjustment that Justin has made on this team, either just in general, and maybe speed up your Calyrex a little bit to take advantage of Tailwind, or just given the nature of NPA, this is a team you might expect Justin to bring. And even if Justin's like the most comfortable with this team, this is the one that he wants to use, he has the option to kind of make those little tweaks and throw off game plans there. You might, if you're Geo, you might have expected your Ogerpon to outspeed, and as soon as it doesn't, you've kind of destroyed a game plan right off the bat.
Yeah, really excellently played game 1 from Justin. I think it's really hard to figure out what Geo could have even done. With Icy Wind, he couldn't have slowed down the Calyrex at any point because it was a clear Amulet Calyrex Ice Rider, so in the way of speed control, he didn't really have a whole lot to counter that Roaring Moon. Justin doing a really excellent job of protecting the Calyrex with the Ogerpon early on, letting it go down, but ultimately getting all the damage he needed to close the game out pretty comfortably there. So going to be back to the drawing board for Gio here. What do you think he does to adjust to that really sound game 1 game plan?
I think the Volcarona could be an option there. We saw the Amoonguss was the 4th Pokemon for Geo that never really got to do anything. And I respect the Amoonguss Bring because it gives you that option into Trick Room. But if you're noticing that Justin's leaning more towards the Tailwind aspect of the team, you have your Volcarona, which would be able to match the Tailwinds. You still have Rage Powder if you need another Redirector. It has the Terra Water, which is pretty solid into Justin's team, especially if you can remove that Ogerpon so early like you did in Game 1. So I think that could be a decent choice there. It just gives you kind of the option to match speed control while also preserving some of that protection for Terapagos.
Yeah, going to see an early indication that the Volcarona might be coming. As Jake said, the ability to set up the Tailwind could be instrumental in preventing that really late game Tailwind that snowballed out of control for Justin's side in the previous game. And we're also seeing a repeat of the Flutter Mane potentially in the back, unless there is a switch off. Didn't do a whole lot in that early game last time, possibly because, the Tailwind didn't come out early. The Roaring Wind was held in the back. Maybe Gio taking a cue saying, okay, I see your move. I see you withholding your speed control. I'm going to try and do a bit of that myself here as we go into the game 2 with Justin up 1 game in this best of 3 set against the potential, not MVP, but one of the strongest players by record in the league right now in Polar Bear. Definitely a bit of an upset game 1.
And also just like a strong player in general, right? We've seen Gio do so well, especially recently. And it's not a shock to see him at 6-1 here in NPA. But we have the leads. Again, it is the Glacial Lance Calyrex Ice Rider next to the Ogerpon, facing down the mixed up Volcarona instead of the Flutter Mane, and that Terapagos once again.
Yeah, the Ogerpon now able to threaten a Follow Me. Once again, the Terra Starstorm did a lot of damage. Almost hard to say if it would one-hit KO the very bulky Ogerpon to begin with, but at least protecting from the option for the Terrestrialization Hyper Beam, which is, we didn't really comment it on the first game, but definitely very scary in team preview as a guaranteed knockout into the Calyrex. But we see a Follow Me come out from the Ogerpon, once again playing it safe and prioritizing damage, as the Starstorm outspeeds even the Volcarona on brings the Ogerpon very low and a follow-up Flamethrower. Once again, the Ogerpon just here to stay on the field, redirect a bit of damage from the Calyrex and go down, and performing that role flawlessly. As the Calyrex goes for Trick Room this time, mixing it up. Notably, we saw that the Amoonguss did not come this match from Gio, so definitely could be scrambling a bit here in the future turns as Justin's own Amoonguss comes onto the field, and with no ability to redirect, the Volcarona is not safety goggles. The Terapagos obviously can't go for a Terra Grass or anything. Could be a very difficult turn to get out of for Gio.
The Trick Room there, I think, was very smart. Noticing that the Volcarona is on the field for Polar Bear, I think it's reasonably safe to assume that Amoonguss is the Pokemon it replaced in the lineup. So knowing that Amoonguss isn't an issue, you can immediately go straight for Trick Room. And also bringing the Amoonguss, which we didn't see from Justin in that first game. So another, mix-up, not only in the strategy, but in the Pokemon selection that's paying off very heavily here. You don't really have anything that can switch into Spore, and nothing, again, even if you want to switch into something that you maybe don't mind going to sleep, it has to take a Glacial Lance at the same time.
Yeah, Spore coming down onto the Volcarona. Gonna stop it for at least 1 turn. It could wake up on the next or future turns, but the Glacial Lance coming out, once again breaking the Terra Shell on the Terapagos, but ultimately not Spored. It at least does get to go for 1 Terra Starstorm into a Pokemon. Could do a lot of damage to the Amoonguss. We're going to see how much damage it does regardless here, though. We see the Terra Starstorm come out. Oh, and it is a bit bulkier on the special side for the Amoonguss. Going to be able to tank that with just a bit HP, but enough to easily, still be on the field and able to Spore the Terapagos and stop the onslaught of damage for future turns.
I like that targeting. You might be tempted to go for the Calyrex just because, big scary Calyrex, you need to damage it and knock it out as soon as you can. But if you go for the Terra Starstorm there, we saw it do less than half in the first game, and Amoonguss can very easily just pollen puff it right back. So I think getting the damage on the Amoonguss is nice. Volcarona takes these Glacial Lances very well. We saw it underspeed Terapagos, so probably on the bulkier end there. And it's something you can just leave on the field here. Try and wake up and knock that Amoonguss out.
Yep, we saw in the first game the Flutter Mane capable of tanking a Glacial Lance. Gio selecting that, has his Spore Sack here. Deciding that the Ogerpon in the back, although immune to the Spore, maybe not worth taking the damage and losing it sturdy. Glacial Lance comes out once again, and it looks like it's gotten a critical hit onto the Volcarona. doing a lot. I think still out of range of one other Glacial Lance, but maybe with the Pollen Puff could follow up for a double KO here. Gonna be close, but definitely not what Gio wanted to see there.
That crit also might just put it straight into high horsepower range as well. Since that Flutter Mane switched into the Spore, there's not really a need to go for something like a Rage Powder on this turn. This Flutter Mane is guaranteed to stay asleep, and Volcarona can wake up, but if it takes a high horsepower for its troubles, it's just as good as being still asleep, right? So bit of a rough break there. The Citrus Berry not activating as well, just kind of insult to injury because of that as one ability. On the Calyrex, we kept the Unnerve from the base Calyrex form there, which means that no berries can be eaten by any Pokemon on the field. And this Volcarona now, which was in a pretty strong defensive position, unfortunately has taken way too much damage.
Bit of an interesting move, going for Tailwind near the end of Trick Room if the Volcarona is able to wake up. We see an Urshifu switch in, just getting some regeneration or healing on the Amoonguss as a Glacial Lance comes out. Not a knockout into Volcarona. Probably a good call not to Pollen Puff. It looks like it would have been a little bit short as the Flutter Mane goes down. The Volcarona gets a chance to wake up and go for an attack here, which it is able to do. Goes for a Tailwind. Flamethrower would have been pretty useless onto the Urshifu switch in. Might have been some good damage into the Calyrex, but yeah, goes for a Tailwind. Interesting play towards the end of Tailwind, or towards the ends of Trick Room. Might be able to get some usage out of it, but yeah, we see the switch into the Terapagos here.
I believe there's one more turn of Trick Room, maybe a couple more. But if this is the last turn of Trick Room, that Tailwind is actually going to be pretty nice because it guarantees that your remaining Pokemon are going to be outspeeding the rest of Justin's for the rest of the game. I think that especially is a nice Tailwind if Roaring Moon was the fourth Pokemon. Given that it's Urshifu, and I think we've seen Terapagos be faster than everything, it wasn't necessarily super impactful, but like you said, the Flamethrower into the Amoonguss slot would have just been absorbed very well by the Urshifu or the Roaring Moon if that was the fourth Pokemon. So it made sense to go for that Tailwind just to kind of cover more options. And I also like saving the Ogerpon if you're Geo in the back, bringing it in after Trick Room has expired, because then that just guarantees that you're going to have that Sturdy active when you need it.
Yep, going to see a Terastallization and a pretty spicy move selection from Geo. We'll see if he ends up getting it off. He did select the Hyper Beam this turn, which will almost assuredly knock out the Calyrex with the additional Terra Normal boost, I believe it gets. Lots of interesting mechanics with the Stellar Terastallization. You see Glacial Lance hitting into the Protecting Volcarona as well as the Terapagos. Got a boost in HP here, but it's going to be really key if the Surging Strikes is also going to be able to knock it out. But with the attack boost from the previous turn, Terapagos really going to go down quite easily. And now it's just going to be, although Trick will be down, finally able to use that Tailwind to good effect, it's going to be Ogerpon and a very low HP Volcarona against the rest of Justin's team here. Quite a difficult spot for Geo to get out of, I'd say.
It is, especially considering this Volcarona is so weak that Aqua Jet will just finish it off. And if you get one Glacial Lance off, Aqua Jet also just knocks out the Ogerpon. You have the option to redirect something. You can make sure your Volcarona doesn't take an Aqua Jet this turn, but at the same time that just breaks your own Sturdy, and then Glacial Lance ends the game. We haven't seen Justin use the Terastallization yet either, so this could be a pretty easy Terra Fairy Calyrex. Remove both the Rock and the Fire type weaknesses just to ensure that you get this final game-winning Glacial Lance off.
Yeah, I think if the Terastallization wasn't still in play here, you could maybe crit an Ivy Cudgel and burn the Urshifu when it hits you with Aqua Jet.
Yeah.
With your Flame Body ability on the Volcarona, but yeah, with the ability to go for a neutral Terastallization against the Ivy Cudgel, Calyrex easily going to be able to survive any attack from the Ogerpon as the Volcarona goes for a last-ditch Rage Powder. Aqua Jet confirming the KO there. And we do actually see the Flame Body activate. A bit of good fortune towards the end, although probably a little bit too late. A little too late for the Volcarona here as the Ivy Cudgel comes out from the Ogerpon, going to do some sizable, I guess you could call it that, damage to the Calyrex as it follows up with a bit more damage on the Glacial Lance, bringing it down to Sturdy. And with Aqua Jet, although burned on the Urshifu, still going to be doing the minimum amount of damage in 1 HP. More or less confirming the game for Justin. And yeah, going to be a pretty decisive victory in this game too for him.
Ogerpon did its best, okay? It was just trying as best as it could. I do think it would have needed both the non-Terastallization and a critical hit to score that 1-hit KO if that was even remotely possible for Geo to still win that game. But expertly played by Justin, of course, with so much experience on that team, winning a regional championship, you have to imagine that that's there probably isn't a matchup that Justin doesn't know at least how to approach in some kind of vague sense, and knew that very well. Even if you don't necessarily predict like the Volcarona into Ogerpon swap for Geo, that four Pokemon that Justin brought are very well equipped to handle pretty much anything on Geo's team if you go into that trick room. So just an expert kind of masterclass in how to play that team from Justin there.
Yeah, not only how to play the team, but how to just really masterfully play a best of three with multiple speed variations. Basically, correctly calls Geo will lead the Flutter Mane to counter the Roaring Moon game one, ends up just completely destroying it with the Calyrex pretty early on. And then game two, as he sees, expects the Flutter Mane to come into back, maybe leave the Amoonguss on the bench to stop the Trick Room mode that he didn't go for game one, switches over to it pretty hard game two, and just finds Geo lacking the resource to handle the Spore Calyrex Ice Rider pressure. Really excellently played from Justin, bringing Geo down to a 6-2 record, still very impressive, and then 4-3 overall for Justin, but very importantly, a loss for one of the players on the Cruisers this week could put them a lot closer to elimination, depending on how the rest of their players fare this week.
All right, let's move on to our second match of the week. We have Gahaku versus Pazder, two trainers that are on the Stars and the Blizzards. The Blizzards have pretty big implications for this match, I believe, Cedric, but the Stars, maybe not so much.
Yeah, exactly. The Stars, I believe, even with the win, will fall just out of reach of the playoffs. So at this point, mostly playing for pride and good practice, which is definitely important. Lots of great players in NPA. Every match can definitely be a learning experience there. Well, the Blizzards are ranked second in the seeding overall, 5 points behind the first seed, Loud Puppies of hailing from New Bark. Basically, if they're able to win and the New Bark Loud Puppies are not able to score a win or a tie this week, the Blizzards will go up to the first seed. I don't believe there's any buys involved in NPA this year, so that will basically just mean they'll play the quote unquote weaker of the third and fourth seed. Both teams definitely going to be very strong, but ideally you do want to be playing the team that is statistically a little weaker in the playoffs here.
All right, let's jump in to our match. Again, we have Gahaku from the Celestic Stars playing up against Pazder from the Snowbell Blizzards. Pretty similar, I guess not super similar team to Geo's Oasis saw, but it is the Terapagos. But instead of the choice specs, we have the Calm Mind Substitute Leftovers variant. And we are going up against another Calyrex Ice Rider team, but again, a little bit different. We got the Chi-Yu and the Cornerstone Ogerpon accompanying it this time.
Yeah, although the restricteds are similar, these sets, of course, playing a huge, difference maker. I'd say the Calm Mind substitute set fares very differently against the Calyrex Ice Rider Amoonguss teams than these choice specs ones. A lot safer with the Terapagos able to heal with the leftovers, set up substitutes to stop the spores from the Amoonguss. So a lot better Amoonguss counterplay overall on Pastor's team. So might not see the same level of Calyrex Amoonguss domination. And on Gahaku's team, we have a pretty offensive take, not no tailwind option, but a speed control Flutter Mane to take advantage of Calyrex's middling speed to potentially get 2 Icy Winds and then start out speeding stuff with the Calyrex, or just go right on the offensive with the Terra Fairy Moonblast and Dazzling Gleams paired with the already fast Choice Scarf Chi-Yu.
We also see another instance of the Mystic Water Taunt Urshifu Rapid Strike, but this time instead of dropping Close Combat, there's no Aqua Jet on this set. So Close Combat is still in play. Could be useful into something like that Cornerstone Ogerpon if you need to get a bunch of damage onto it very quickly. But the lack of priority could be something that comes into play as well. If you do take a couple Icy Winds, like you mentioned, Cedric, there's no way to make sure you're attacking before your opponent's Pokemon anymore. So something to keep in mind with your approach this matchup for Gahaku.
Yeah, we once again see Taunt on the Flutter Mane. Could stop Trick Rooms from the Calyrex Ice Rider, but of course, as we saw in that first game on Justin's side, sometimes just a Glacial Lance to the face is better than a Trick Room. So going to be an interesting set. We'll see how the players are able to dance around each other. Definitely be on the lookout for that substitute Terapagos, deterring the Amoonguss from being as strong as it usually would. But of course, the Amoonguss also has an interesting off-standard option in Clear Smog to get rid of Calm Mind. So definitely a lot of push and pull between the players. Going to be interesting how they choose to select Pokemon and basically just dance between one another in this first game.
Let's see how that dance goes and jump in to the match. Our second match of the day. Again, Gahaku from the Celestic Stars, Pazder from the Snowbell Blizzards playing for that first seed going into playoffs. With two interesting variations on team archetypes that we're seeing a lot of in this Regulation G format. I think just how you manage the substitute calm mindsets of the Tropicos is often kind of the deciding factor on how a lot of these matchups goes. If you let it get a substitute up, maybe a couple of calm minds, it might be very difficult to take down, especially if you can eliminate some of the physical attackers on Gahaku's side of the field. But at the same time, if you're not able to get it going, that's a lot of your offense that you're just not getting set up.
Yeah, exactly. I do just want to point out something really cool about the players here. Gahaku, I believe, hails from the Japanese region, only plays in the Japanese circuit, might have been to the World Championship a few times. Pastor, I think, a Greek player originally, so playing in the EU circuit. So basically, the thing that's so cool about NPA is it introduces a lot of circumstances where players from different regions who might never have the opportunity to play each other do get to do so and learn from each other. So I think that's a really cool aspect of Gahaku versus Pastor. But yeah, as you were saying, Jake, going to be kind of difficult. I think the ability, basically the calm mind on the Terapagos could be kind of tricky for the special attackers on the Fluttermane and Chiyu to overcome, but the kind of physical deterrence in the Amoonguss and the Incineroar could be hard to break for the Calyrex Ice Rider, Urshifu, and Ogerpon. So yeah, going to be an interesting battle of control, I would say, on Pastor's side versus the more offensive side of the Calyrex Ice Rider and Gahaku.
The one thing that is nice, of course the Chiyu won't be able to do a bunch of damage to the Tropicos if it does get a couple calm minds set up, but it does have access to Snarl, so even if the substitute goes up, the Snarl being a sound move will bypass the substitute and be able to reduce special attack by 1. And that the Beads of Ruin will also still be active, so you can kind of mitigate both aspects of the calm mind boost if you need to with that Chiyu, but it looks like we're not going to be seeing it in this first game.
Yeah, deviating from the Chiyu, just going for a bit potentially less offensive, quote-unquote safer option in this game 1, leaving the sometimes inaccurate and sometimes very frail Chiyu on the bench here, as we see the leads come out from Pastor and Gahaku, going for the Incineroar and the Terapagos against the Calyrex and the Fluttermane. So, as we mentioned, some speed control potential on the Fluttermane with Icy Wind. Actually, I think I'm mixing up my Fluttermanes here. This is the... Well, it does have Icy Wind as well, but yeah. No taunt on the Terapagos, which is very important against the opposing Terapagos with the substitute and Calm Mind pressure, but could lower the speed with the Icy Wind and make it a little bit easier to outspeed and KO later in the game.
Of course, the Intimidate coming through from the Incineroar will not affect the Calyrex Ice Rider. Kind of the... I'm often very shocked to find Calyrex that aren't running the Clear Amulet. Of course, this one is running that item that's just so good on Calyrex. Make sure that your attack stat is never lowered, especially once you get some of those as one boosts going. And the Intimidate into Fluttermane will almost never be a factor. That speed booster energy will activate, the Icy Wind on the field. Maybe not the most impactful moves right now, but of course it is a way to break Terra Shell. I think if you Icy Wind into Terra Shell, it might just heal itself right back up to full though, so possibly not the most impactful option here. Gahaku weighing his options before we jump right into the action here. In this second match of the NPA stream, Fluttermane will be going... Oh, I think that was the Icy Wind? I unfortunately cannot read Japanese. No, Dazzling Gleam. Alright, Dazzling Gleam will break the Terra Shell. Get a little bit of damage into that Incineroar as well. Calm Mind comes through though, boosting the special attack and special defense of this Terapagos by 1 stage. Immediately going for that pressure. You see the high horsepower outspeeding the Incineroar, just barely not KOing, and Incineroar will get a Will-O-Wisp off.
Yeah, super impactful turn there. The Calyrex now being burned. The damage potential into the opposing Terapagos is going to be very limited, and as we saw the Calm Mind going up, the special attacker is going to be very limited against beating the Terapagos in the first place, so extremely influential survival on the Incineroar, but also an indication of the speed on the Calyrex to outspeed the Incineroar. Gahaku may be kicking themselves a little bit for going for the greedy Dazzling Gleam high horsepower instead of Moonblast, which would have picked up the KO, but that's something that they can adapt for in the game 2. But yeah, the Terapagos definitely sitting pretty, I guess you could say. The leftover is now going to heal it back to full HP after another turn if it doesn't take damage, which it could do through Protect. And then it would have the Terra Shell active once again. Definitely keep a lookout for the Terra Shell being on the board, or being preserved to allow the Terapagos to easily tank at close combat from Urshifu later in the game. So yeah, that's one of the more subtle resources that Pastor is going to be trying to preserve in this matchup as we go into this second turn with the Incineroar switching out.
Incineroar doesn't want to give a free Glacial Lance boost, or as one boost over to that Calyrex Ice Rider. Amoonguss will hit the field instead. The Fluttermane will go for an Icy Wind here, but it looks like it might have missed the Amoonguss, so a little bit of damage missed out there, but the speed on Terapagos will be lowered by 1 stage. And now that Calyrex will benefit from that speed boost, the Terapagos will attack afterwards, go for a second Calm Mind, after Glacial Lance does pretty pitiful damage to the Terapagos, and even the Amoonguss taking that very, very well thanks to the burn.
Yeah, honestly, usually the Icy Wind wouldn't matter missing too much in the Amoonguss. It doesn't do that much damage, but with the Glacial Lance doubling up on it, you might expect it's pretty close to, after the Icy Wind being in range for another Glacial Lance. The fact that it didn't means that you can't safely go for Dazzling Gleam Glacial Lance and continue chipping down the Terapagos and everything in the back. Although the Calyrex is definitely losing out on damage, it's at least steadily going to be starting to, it'll knock out the Amoonguss with another Icy Wind potentially. Going to be pretty close there, but if notably you're immune to burn, which is pretty nice, or you're immune to spore because of the burn, so, silver lining there. But as the Icy Winds continue to fall on the Terapagos, the Calyrex, which we saw to be a bit speedy, it might already outspeed the bulky Terapagos, and just continue to pressure it and keep its HP low to prevent it from getting that Terra Shell up and allow Urshifu to clean up later in the game. As we see a Terastallization come out from Pazdur, and we see the Terapagos begin the Terastallization.
Knowing that Terra Shell probably cannot activate for the rest of this game, we get the Stellar Terra once again coming out from Terapagos. We'll give it a little bit more bulk with some higher HP and turn Terra Starstorm into a spread attack. Amoonguss, wanting to protect its partner from any damage, goes for that Rage Powder, but Fluttermane... that was Protect, not Rage Powder. My bad. The Icy Wind does come through here, though. Tiny bit of damage into Terapagos, but importantly lowering the speed once again, as Calyrex will have the chance to go for what I assume is another Glacial Lance. Again, the Amoonguss taking no damage, but another, consistent little bits of chip damage into that Terapagos, like you mentioned, Cedric.
Yeah, they're starting to add up over time. The Terapagos now starting to get closer to about 60% of its HP, which nothing to sneeze at. It's a pretty massive HP total, so any chunk you can take can be important. We see a massive Terra Starstorm come out onto the Fluttermane. Notably, of course, being a normal type move, Terra Starstorm before the Terastallization cannot hit the Fluttermane, and given that Terapagos has no other attacking moves, the hand was sort of forced there to try and take that, start getting this Fluttermane applying consistent damage and speed control off the field. I definitely do like the timing of that Terastallization and offensive attack on Pazdur a fair bit. At this point, I think we saw that with all the burn damage adding up over time, the Terra Starstorm going to be a pretty clean knockout. So although you could keep the Amoonguss in and risk getting knocked out, you could also easily switch out to the Incineroar, which, depending on which is in the back, it might be a little bit less valuable. But we do see, we do end up seeing the switch from the Amoonguss.
Amoonguss will activate that Regenerator and heal itself up back to nearly full, and like you said, Cedric, Incineroar will hit the field, most likely a Sacrificial Lamb into the Glacial Lance of the Calyrex this turn. Just wanting to make sure that Amoonguss sticks around and is able to support that Terapagos later on in the game. Fluttermane does not want to get knocked out by a Terra Starstorm, so will protect itself on this turn, as Glacial Lance comes through, is enough to claim a knockout on Incineroar and give itself a +1 attack boost from as1. But as we have not seen the Terapagos attacked yet, I do believe that attack boost will go to waste, as Terra Starstorm will come through here and, if not knock out the Calyrex, put it in range for a burn knockout. Damage coming out here again. It is a spread move, but the Fluttermane protected itself this turn, and Calyrex goes down.
Yeah, nice to take the knockout on the restricted, but you almost have to wonder if you don't want to go for substitute that turn, with such little offensive pressure being offered. And now just giving potentially a free switch into Urshifu, that could be, not a huge problem given that you have the Amoonguss in the back, but could have been, a bit slower of an option to just hold the advantage instead of just forcing a board state where a fresh offensive Pokemon takes the field in this Ogerpon, as we do see the Amoonguss coming in, likely attempting to redirect attacks, but of course the grass typing on the Ogerpon, able to ignore that Rage Powder completely.
Yeah, interesting, choice there, because the Ogerpon coming in, it won't be redirected by the Amoonguss, but I don't know that it has the juice to knock out Terapagos on its own. You could opt for maybe a Terastallization to boost the Ivy Cudgel damage, but if you do that and you fail to knock out the Terapagos, you not only lose Sturdy, but you make yourself, weak to the Terra Starstorm coming through here. So, these Calm Mind boosts might come in extra handy here, because this Fluttermane also will have a hard time damaging the Terapagos, which does instead opt to protect itself this turn. It will not take any damage from either Pokemon on Gahaku's side of the field, as Icy Wind comes out once again. Does connect to the Mungus this time. It actually does a pretty big chunk, so I think Citric, you were probably right that that would have added up to a 2-hit KO. But Ivy Cudgel comes straight onto the Amoonguss. A nice read by Gahaku to guarantee the damage comes out this turn. Unfortunately, just not enough, as the Fluttermane will be put to sleep by a Spore.
Yeah, pretty good read there. Reading that to Tropico is going to play it a bit safe, go for a protect, heal up just a bit more HP. And as we saw, there was really no knockout threat in the Amoonguss, shy of an Ivy Cudgel crit. So it takes the turn, the Fluttermane's already protected, let's just put that to sleep and make our Terapagos even safer. Now the Amoonguss now in range of an Ivy Cudgel from the Ogerpon. We'll see if Pastor deems it, acceptable to switch out and just potentially take a hit on the switch or just go for protect. But yeah, the Terapagos now sitting fairly pretty. I'd imagine even with a Terastallization on the Ogerpon, unless you get a critical hit on the Ivy Cudgel, the Terapagos should just answer back with a double knockout on the Terra Starstorm. So yeah, definitely a dicey spot. We see Gahaku kind of scrambling for time, goes for a spiky shield, just trying to force the issue for a future turn and potentially allow the Fluttermane to go down this turn from a Terra Starstorm.
Ezra will once again swap out that Amoonguss, wanting to get it a little bit healthier for later on in the game. Urshifu is the final Pokemon for Pastor, as the Ogerpon goes for the Spiky Shield, guaranteeing that it will not take any damage this turn. Fluttermane does take its first required turn of sleep, as it was put to sleep by the Amoonguss last turn. It looks like we're getting a Terra Starstorm from this Terapagos, which will knock out the Fluttermane and put Pastor up at a 3-2 Pokemon count. And depending on what Gahaku's final Pokemon here, it might be a little bit difficult to break through the combination of this Terapagos and Urshifu.
Yeah, interesting switch out. We actually, very critically, this Urshifu Rapid Strike is not Focus Sash. It is a Mystic Water set, leaving it susceptible to a Power Whip from the Ogerpon and Gahaku's side, depending on the training of the two Pokemon. That could just be an instant knockout. And we see the Urshifu finally taking the field. I believe it's a Terra Stellar Urshifu Rapid Strike on Gahaku's side, so he definitely going for the Spiky Shield, a lot safer of a play, and just allowing the Fluttermane to go down there in a disadvantageous position. Gets a free, really offensive switch into the Urshifu with Terastallization still on the board, and potentially threatening a knockout with the Terra Stellar Close Combat into the Terapagos. Really a huge turnaround by just stalling for the turns and not allowing the Amoonguss to stick around on the field, forcing it out at just the right moment.
Yeah, I love that, you knew exactly when to, protect your Pokemon, when to get some damage off. The Icy Winds are coming in handy on Terapagos here. We've seen some Terapagos be pretty speedy in the past, especially in that last match, and now you don't really have to worry about that at all. Regardless of how you've trained your Ogerpon and your Urshifu, you can be pretty confident it will be outspeeding this, -3 or 4 Terapagos for Pastor. We do see the Stellar Terra activate from Gahaku's Urshifu, which will power up either the Close Combat or the Surging Strikes once each. The Power Whip comes through and connects, which is a clean one-hit KO, eliminating that Urshifu from Pastor's side of the field immediately. And if we see a Close Combat follow-up here, this could be a clean double KO. It does get the Stellar Boost from the Terastallization, and Terapagos is knocked out in one hit.
Yeah, quite a stellar turnaround there from the Urshifu. Haha. And yeah, just really, I think I pointed it out earlier in the match, but there was a turn where Pastor went for a Terra Starstorm to take a free knockout into the Calyrex. Could have been a double knockout if the Fluttermane didn't protect, but really just excellent play on Gahaku's side to slow play it, just continually protect, allow, basically get his opportunities to slowly chip down and force the Amoonguss out so we could finally get the Urshifu in safely. If substitutes come out a little earlier from Pastor, that's one adjustment that we could see in the future games to really just stop the potential for that Stellar Terra Close Combat to just wipe it out from near full HP. So what felt like Pastor's game early on got, a key Will-O-Wisp into the Calyrex Ice Rider. Calyrex Ice Rider turned out not to be the key piece in that matchup, the Urshifu ultimately being the one to take it there.
I agree. I think those substitutes could have been very impactful, especially on some of those turns where Gahaku was slow playing it. You have the burned Calyrex not doing too much. You've got your Calm Mind boost up, so I don't know that Fluttermane would have even been capable of breaking the substitute on its own. So that could have been a bit of a missed opportunity there. Maybe identifying that. You've seen how Gahaku's approached this matchup. He's willing to take some slower turns, protect and reposition, and maybe you can try and capitalize on one of those more defensive turns and gain a lot of momentum with that substitute, especially if you're able to get some Pollen Puffs off. That's something we didn't get to see the Amoonguss go for at all in this game. which can be a huge tool because the healing aspect of Pollen Puff bypasses Substitute, which is a really interesting quirk of the attack. So if you have a Substitute up, you can Pollen Puff yourself up, and if you haven't Terastallized, you can even reactivate Terra Shell behind Substitute, which is a really, really hard position to break. So obviously that's a little bit difficult to set up, but that could be an option for Pazder, given that we've seen Gahaku played a little bit more slowly.
Yeah, I do think it just does have to come down to play for Pazder. The Substitute getting up almost seems essential. You have to make sure that Substitute is up and ready for the Urshifu when it comes in, or at least have the Amoonguss in a suitable place to go for a Rage Powder. I think switching out the Urshifu was ultimately, well, I guess it probably didn't matter since you could have just followed up with an Ivy Cudgel, Terra Stellar Close Combat the next turn. But I do think the Substitute does need to be up on the field otherwise, as we've seen. Keeping the Terra Shell not so easy to do with all the spread attacks on Gahaku's team, so really just going to need to get that Substitute up safely. And given you kind of got the turn one perfectly right, you got the Will-O-Wisp on the Calyrex and you got a Calm Mind up, there might just have to be some pretty substantial improvements in the play, or at least adjusting the game plan a little bit. Maybe bringing Fluttermane or another Pokemon in the back that allows you to handle that Urshifu with no defensive Terastallization a little bit easier.
Speaking of game plan adjustments too, like you kind of called out right after it happened, on the first turn of game one, if Gahaku had opted instead of for the Dazzling Gleam, you go straight for the Moonblast High Horsepower, that can change the course of the game pretty drastically if the Calyrex does not get burned. We are going to see a mirror of the leads, though. It's the Incineroar and Terapagos next to the Fluttermane and Calyrex Ice Rider. So given how these trainers approached the first turn of the last game, Cedric, how do you think they're going to go about this first turn here?
Yeah, there's a whole host of options that the Incineroar has at its disposal. You can, of course, knock off the Clear Amulet. If you expect to survive the turn, that means you can Intimidate and Parting Shot the Calyrex Ice Rider later on, but given Gahaku's turn one decision last time to really prioritize damage onto that Incineroar, might be a little less likely. If you expect the double up into the Incineroar this time, maybe you go for Fake Out into the Calyrex, just thinking, okay, I'm probably not going to get away with that turn one twice, so just play it a little bit safer and take the guaranteed stoppage turn on the Calyrex Ice Rider and go for a Calm Mind with the Terapagos. As we see, that Fake Out indeed does come out.
No high horsepowers this turn, as Moonblast still does a pretty good chunk of damage to Incineroar, lowers the special attack inconsequentially, and a Calm Mind immediately up from the Terapagos. Terra Shell not being broken this turn, given the Moonblast targeting and the lack of attack from the Calyrex. But I think a decent turn for both players there, Cedric.
Yeah, you stop the Calyrex and you get a Calm Mind up in exchange for a fair bit of damage on the Incineroar. At this point, now a Moonblast High Horsepower or Dazzling Gleam High Horsepower will easily knock out the Incineroar. Given that we saw that the previous turn, or the previous game one, I believe, that even without Icy Wind on the field, Calyrex Ice Rider outsped the Incineroar, could be pretty safe to go for that. Honestly, it's getting really close to maybe a Moonblast Glacial Lance if you want to go really crazy and either expect a switch out into the Amoonguss in fear of the High Horsepower, which we might end up seeing. We do see the Incineroar switch out.
It is retreating. If the Amoonguss is coming in here, that could be a rough break for Pazder. As it is, might be two ice attacks coming its way. Fluttermane attacks first. Looks like it will be the Icy Wind was selected, which will damage both targets. No misses this time around, lowering the speeds. And Terapagos still attacking before... No, that was the Terra Shell. That was the text that was coming through there. The speeds drop. And now we get the Calyrex Glacial Lance. A great play from Gahaku to capitalize on that swap. And Amoonguss hits the field and immediately gets knocked out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just about as poor of a turn as you could hope, as you could expect from Pazder. Expects the High Horsepower to take the clean KO on the Incineroar, but instead the Amoonguss switch in, predicted perfectly and knocked out by the Glacial Lance, not only taking out a key piece to protect the Terapagos from the Urshifu that is surely waiting in the back for Gahaku, but as well giving the attack boost with the as one Chilling Neigh boost on the Calyrex. Now going to be a clean knockout into the Fluttermane if you're able to get an attack off, although you did take a lot of damage from the Starstorm, so it's not a completely null turn. But yeah, definitely not loving taking a just instant knockout on your Amoonguss.
Fluttermane is the fourth Pokemon for Pazder this time around, so it could be a bit of a swap in the strategy there. We saw the Urshifu just get knocked out by the Power Whip right off the bat. Gotta respect the swap to the Fluttermane. It is a more support-oriented set. It's the same booster speed, but it is carrying both Taunt and Thunder Wave on top of the standard Moonblast and Icy Wind. So really there to be a disruptive force. Depending on how the Fluttermane are trained, if the Fluttermane on Pazur's side is faster, you will have the option to go for a Thunder Wave right off the bat, maybe protect the Terapagos from taking another attack from either of these two Pokemon with a bit of speed control. But Calyrex, not wanting to risk anything, protects itself this turn before the two Fluttermane reveal their speed interactions. Look like that's Pazur's going first this time around. We see the attack being blocked by the Protect, so it looks like that was probably a Thunder Wave if I had to guess. Icy Wind does come through, which will lower the speeds for the two Pokemon on Pazur's side once again. And now, given the -1 on the Fluttermane on Pazur's end, should be attacking after Gahaku's on the following turn. Looks like that's another attack straight into the Protect of the Calyrex, so a really smart Protect there from Gahaku.
Yeah, good Protect. I think potentially a missed opportunity once again for Pastor to get a substituted up. In the following turn, you'd still, after an Icy Wind, be able to outspeed the opposing Fluttermane, and potentially the Thunder Wave Terra Starstorm just knocking the Calyrex outright while preventing you from taking a Glacial Lance that would break the substitute. So yeah, just once again, Gahaku one step ahead on the Protects, and now going to be a very difficult spot to beat just a simple play of Icy Wind, Glacial Lance. You could just, you will outspeed with the Fluttermane on the Thunder Wave, but at this point, the Terapagos is at maybe 1 or 2 stages of lowered speed, so the Calyrex might, two just now, and then another Icy Wind. The Calyrex, even while Thunder Wave might outspeed, so yeah, might just have to start rolling the dice for a Thunder Wave paralysis at this point.
Paralyzation will immediately happen, though. It's going to be the Terapagos once again taking that Stellar Terraform, empowering the Terra Starstorm to hit both targets on the field. If it does get an attack off this turn, could be a huge swing in Pazur's favor. The Icy Wind will come through first, though, from Gahaku's Fluttermane, lowering the speeds once again. Terapagos now down to -3 and Fluttermane at -2, but the Fluttermane on Pazur's side attacks first still. Thunder Wave does go into Calyrex, which will have its speed for the remainder of the game, and importantly, give it a chance to not attack at all with full paralysis. Doesn't matter though, as Terra Starstorm will go first. Even with all those speed drops, the Thunder Wave is enough to make it up, and Calyrex hangs on! That's going to be a huge Glacial Lance coming through here. It has the boost already from the As-1, and Fluttermane gets knocked out. Terapagos taken very low.
Yeah, maybe an expectation from Pastor there that the Terapagos was going to be outsped even after the Thunder Wave and Icy Wind combination, so goes for the added HP instead of the increased base power of the single target Terra Starstorm as opposed to the spread type. And that difference maker ends up being pretty substantial, as the Calyrex lives on 16 HP, gets off a +1 Glacial Lance into both targets, taking out one, and now still it leads the Fluttermane and the Calyrex. Just going to be a nightmare to get through here, as the Terapagos is at such low HP, still able to get a substituted up, but even, if a Moonblast goes off, stopping that in its tracks. And yeah, just going to be really difficult for Pastor to claw out of such a strong early game from Gahaku.
And just looking at the two Pokemon Gahaku has left too, that's, pretty prime conditions to just come in with that Urshifu and Cornerstone Ogerpon later on in this game if you need to, and clean up the final two Pokemon. So looks like Pastor sees the writing on the wall and will concede the second game. So a very clean 2-0 win from Gahaku in this set. There's really impressive play there from Gahaku, just knowing kind of how these Calm Mind Terapagos teams need to function, and asserting control over the match against a team that likes to have the control itself.
Yeah, I think, as we pointed out throughout the gameplay, you do just have to find ways to get the substitute up to not get swept by the Urshifu, and Gahaku was just consistently getting turns correctly to stop Pastor from doing that. So just hats off to Gahaku. Really excellently played both games on the back foot in game 1, and then just once he had the advantage in game 2, just would not let Pastor get an opportunity to claw back. So really impressive.
All right. Fantastic 2 matches we've had already today for the NPA Week 9 stream. It's time for our third and final match. We're going to be bringing you Sonoru versus Chichiat, 2 players that are very well known outside of NPA and not having the greatest of NPA runs, but looking to end their season on a higher note.
Yeah, I think most importantly, Chichiat on the Samurais is on a team that is fighting for playoff contention. The Masks, I believe, out of contention, but the Samurais, if they're able to get a win, I'm not sure if they tie, if they'll be able to make it, but a win in this. Actually, it's the Samurai. So yeah, they do just basically need to get a win on Chichiat's side to make it to playoffs and continue their season. So going to be very high stakes. And ultimately, with everything on the line, brings the team that has served himself the best, this Terapagos Heatran Screamtail team that he's sort of been known for this regulation.
We're taking a pretty interesting take on this pretty standard Miraidon team as well. It is the same 6 Pokemon that we're very used to. It's kind of the core Miraidon build. It did win the World Championships not too long ago, but a lot of interesting choices here. The Urshifu, instead of being Focus Sash, is Mystic Water. It is one of the sets that dropped Close Combat for Taunt. And the Ogerpon Hearth Flame is running Focus Energy instead of a Grass type attack. So Ivy Cudgel, the only attack there, but will be, have an even higher chance of critical hitting after a Focus Energy. And of course, the Whimsicott is not Covert Cloak. It is running the Focus Sash instead of the Urshifu. So a lot of survivability there.
Yeah, the lack of the Covert Cloak could be kind of annoying against the double Fake Out core on Chichiot's side, but I like that you pointed out the Focus Energy Ivy Cudgel Ogerpon. Number one, it's really good against Intimidate and Incineroar, guaranteeing that you'll be able to get a critical hit with the increased critical chance already on top of Ivy Cudgel. You have, I believe, 100% critical hits there, which is a very cool interaction. But notably, this is one of the few teams in this metagame that doesn't have the number one usage Pokemon, water type Urshifu. So just completely getting rid of the grass type coverage option on the Ogerpon turns out really, really good for Sonoru in this team preview, I'd say.
Especially given one of the things that Chichiot's team can use to take fire type attacks pretty well is that Flash Fire Heatran, but the Mold Breaker on Ogerpon completely bypasses that. So if you're able, unless you Terastallize, of course, you will lose Mold Breaker. But if you do opt for some Focus Energies, then you're probably going to be what at KOing a lot of the things on this team.
Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting matchup. Lots of terrain overriding with the Rillaboom and Terapagos's Terastallization to get rid of the electric terrain that boosts up the Miraidon and Iron Hands' attacking power. And then on the flip side, just a lot of physical attackers with actually no close combat on the Urshifu. That is one upside for Chichiot here. But yeah, just going to be a pretty tricky matchup, I think, on both sides. But you got to give the edge to that, honestly, Balance Breaker, Focus Energy, Ivy Cudgel Ogerpon that Sonoru has cooked up for us here.
Well, let's jump into our third and final match. I like that you called out the terrain overriding here because we've seen two Terapagos, against two teams that don't have terrain. So the choice to go for that Terastallization is pretty solely reliant on not needing Terra Shell for the rest of the game and wanting to spread damage and maybe a little bit of extra HP. But now there's that extra factor of do I need to save my Terastallization for a moment when I need to cancel out the electric terrain, or can I afford to use it with maybe my own grassy terrain up instead?
Yeah, one key difference maker between this Ogerpon and previous, not Ogerpon, Terapagos. We've seen 3 Terapagos on stream. This one has leftovers in the combination of grassy terrain on its side. So while in the previous matches, Terra Shell was being burst down and basically eliminated for the most of the match, Chichiot really has the option to go for protects, go for substitutes, and still have the option to have that Terra Shell active later on in the battle that maybe the other players did not, which can be really beneficial when you have the massive burst damage potential of both the Miraidon, the Iron Hands, and the Ogerpon on Sonoru's side.
A lot of the times this Miraidon team that we are seeing Sonoru run uses both of the fighting types to combat Terapagos pretty well. Of course, only having the one weakness to fighting means that hacking those 2 fighting types can be pretty impactful in this matchup, but dropping close combat on Urshifu makes that a lot more difficult, especially considering we have that Rillaboom there that can handle the Urshifu very, very well. It is Terra Water Urshifu, so there's no, Terra Grass for defensive options. If it's stuck on the field with Rillaboom and grassy terrain is up, it could just be cleared out by a grassy glide. And so this Iron Hands, with that Assault Vest, of course, makes it even easier to go up against that Terapagos, but you might need to be making good use of the double fighting moves on Iron Hands there. So you got 2 fighting moves still, just on the same Pokemon instead of spread apart.
Yeah, redistributed them a little bit, but Taunt can definitely be really important on such a setup-oriented team with the Terapagos. But of course, Chichiot also knows that Taunt could be coming out on some of those turns where setup is very nice. So if the Calm Mind's already up, the single target or even double target Terra Starstorm could still start punching holes through the team if Sonoru starts to get a little bit cheeky and tries to throw a taunt out instead of damage. But we're going to jump into this turn 1. Going to be interesting. I think calling back a bit to the Justin Tang game, familiarity with one's team is definitely very key when going up against super familiar matchups, and there's no more familiar matchup, I'd imagine, for Chichiot than this Worlds winning Miraidon team. As we see the leads come out with Miraidon and the Balance Breaker, Focus Energy, Ogre Pawn, Hearthflame form come out against the Rillaboom Terapagos. So going to be, you know, the Electro Terrain getting active and then the Grassy Terrain immediately shutting it down. Pretty solid lead from Sisiot. As the, just the Fake Up Pressure being active, but Farigaf could of course switch in. Definitely could be a volatile turn from both players.
It could, but especially considering this, Ogre Pawn really likes facing down this Rillaboom, and of course the Terapagos without any kind of Calm Mind boost just yet. Pretty perfect place for it to be. If you want to go straight for something like that Focus Energy, it will allow you to, get that boosted chance of critical hits up, guaranteeing that those Ivy Cudgels become critical hits, and then you don't have to worry about any kind of Intimidate drops for the rest of the game, because again, they will be ignored by the critical hits. Fake Out comes through from Rillaboom, though, will prevent any attacks from this Ogre Pawn on this turn. The Terapagos' Terra Shell activating means that it looks like Miraidon is going straight for the Volt Switch into that slot, trying to break that Terra Shell, prevent it from mitigating any damage later on in this game, and of course reposition that Miraidon to make sure that your Electric Terrain can come back up.
Yep, we see a reveal of the back Pokemon. It was Whimsicott and Iron Hand, so no option to block the Fake Out cycling that Chichiot may have brought. We see the Terapagos take about 25% HP, gonna be, only Chichiot's going to know whether it is above or below 25%, which would allow him to heal an additional turn with leftovers and get back to full HP and recover that Terra Shell. But does critically get the Calm Mind active as the Whimsicott enters the field. Now threatening with Encore could be a pretty bad spot as, no Focus Energy up, but the Encore could really lock this Terapagos out from making any meaningful progress for the rest of the game if Sunaru gets it off successfully.
The Encore could, lock the Calm Mind into place for Terapagos, or even the Fake Out on Rillaboom. It's kind of the two moves you really want to be Encoring in the first place, so a really great switch into that Whimsicott. And again, a prime position, I think, for this Ogre Pawn to be going for the Focus Energy to become a threat for the rest of the game. Not only is it kind of not threatened by damage from either Pokemon on this turn, but the added bonus of the Encore being in effect creates so much space for Ogre Pawn to start becoming a huge threat.
You see a pretty aggressive lock from Sunaru going for Light Screen with the Whimsicott, just predicting that there might be some level of defensive play, which Chichiot is sort of known for with this team, protecting Terapagos. We see Light Screen go, but no protect from the Terapagos. Going to see the Terapagos free to go for whatever it wants as the Ogre Pawn finally gets the Focus Energy up. Going to be a menace against the rest of the Pokemon as Terapagos locks itself into an attacking move, bringing the Whimsicott pretty low, but still, likely... it's going to be pretty close, actually, with the Light Screen up, whether it will fall to a Terastallized Starstorm in future turns. But yeah, we see no Miraidon switch in that turn, so just shy of the Terra Shell activation, so the Terapagos a little bit safer than it normally would be.
Yeah, probably just 1 or 2 HP off there, so an unfortunate turn of events. Of course, the Ogre Pawn coming in, fresh, nothing to be encored into, and the Terapagos making a bold play from Chichiot there to go straight for that Terra Starstorm to get some damage on the Whimsicott. I think you're going to respect the Light Screen there too. That kind of takes advantage of a very defensive play from Chichiot, like you kind of called out there, Cedric. So proactive moves on both ends for players. But I think the Ogre Pawn coming in here for Chichiot is especially nice because now this Ogre Pawn Hearthflame on Sunaru's side did get the Focus Energy up. And now it does have to worry about taking Ivy Cudgels. And thanks to Sturdy, even you can do as much damage as you want to this Ogre Pawn on Chichiot's end, but you cannot one-hit KO it. Spiky Shield does come through, though, guaranteeing it will not take any damage this turn. It looks like that might be an Ivy Cudgel from the opposing Ogre Pawn going into that slot, but unfortunately, because it is not a contact move, you're not taking any chip damage. Sturdy is broken, though, by the Whimsicott, going straight from Moonblast into the Cornerstone Ogre Pawn, as Terapagos follows up with the Terra Starstorm for a KO into Whimsicott.
Yeah, so it gets the advantage in terms of breaking the Sturdy, but ultimately doesn't get the Encore lock or critically the Tailwind up. So, could be the case that the Ogre Pawn still outspeeds and knocks out Sunaru's Ogre Pawn with the Rock-type Ivy Cudgel. Going to be a bit forced into bringing the Miraidon here, which isn't ideal given that the Terapagos on Chichiot's side has not burned its Terastallization and is still free to basically get rid of the Electric Terrain with its own Terastallization. So Miraidon does come in, threatening a knockout into the Ogre Pawn, but definitely some strong defensive counterplays still on Chichiot's side, as although we do kind of have the ideal offensive position on Sunaru's side, Chichiot having done a pretty good job of preventing it, of still having resources on the board to handle it.
Just now that this Tropico's Terra Shell is up, I know we talked a lot about the Mold Breaker breaking the like flash fire on the Heatran earlier on before the game started, but even the Terra Shell is active again, but the Mold Breaker will just bypass that. It would have bypassed Sturdy, so I misspoke on the last turn as well. The Spiky Shield there, just making sure that you're able to kind of reposition some of your Pokemon. This Miraidon coming in now is in a much more commanding offensive position. We have the electric terrain up, and if the Rillaboom wants to swap in, it might have to do so at the cost of taking something like a Draco Meteor or even an Ivy Cudgel on the swap, which could be pretty devastating. Switch out from the Ogerpon Hearthflame, though. We're not going to see any boosted Ivy Cudgel's crit rates on this turn, as the Iron Hands comes in instead, wanting to take that Ivy Cudgel from the Rock-type Ogerpon pretty well. That Quark Drive will be activated, and we see Terrestrialization coming out. I'm guessing that's going to be the Terapagos to cancel out that Electric Terrain.
Yeah, it is +2, or rather, it is +1. It already has the Calm Mind boost on the Terapagos, so going to be doing a fair amount of damage with the Starstorm. However, this is an Assault Vest Iron Hands, and based on the HP stat on the Miraidon, looks to be trained fairly bulkily, and with the Light Screen already active, might be pretty happy. Oh, that is a quite speedy Ogerpon, or rather a pretty slow Miraidon. Ivy Cudgel getting a bit of extra credit into the Iron Hands as it switches in, and the Miraidon takes the knockout on the Ogerpon. Maybe makes a little bit more sense why the Ogerpon, Hearthflame having previously gone for Spiky Shield, switched out. Sonoru definitely knew that the Ivy Cudgel probably would just knock it out, and yeah, just based on the speed stat there, was forced to switch out the Ogerpon as the Starstorm comes out, does a bit of HP to both, but we're seeing the dividends of that bulk on the Miraidon, although not able to take the KO early on the Ogerpon, tanks that Terra Starstorm like a champ.
It does take that Terra Starstorm very well, but you're kind of in a rough position here if you are Sonoru, just because you have your Miraidon at -2 special attack without electric terrain up on the field. If you want to, get not only reset your special attack, but re-establish that electric terrain, you've got to swap it out. All you've got is that Hearthflame Ogerpon in the back. And even with Light Screen up, you're probably going to have to take something like the Terra Starstorm on the way in. And at the same time, Chichiot still has Rillaboom in the back. So even if you do get Miraidon off the field and back on, despite the Terrestrialization on the Terapagos being used, you do have to worry about the Rillaboom swapping in. It will not be the Miraidon swapping out, though. It is the Iron Hands instead. So Ogerpon Hearthflame retakes the field without that boosted critical hit rate. The Mold Breaker still remains active, though, as Draco Meteor goes straight into the Incineroar for a little bit of damage, and even without the electric terrain at -2 special attack, it's a big chunk of damage. Another Calm Mind, though, will get the Terapagos up to +2 special attack and special defense.
Yeah, might have been noticing that first Starstorm wasn't really doing quite the damage that was necessary. Wow, we see a Parting Shot come out from Chichiot. There was a really easy Fake Out or Will-O-Wisp onto that Ogerpon slot. So just a credit to Chichiot there, going for the Parting Shot into the Miraidon, lowering its HP even further, and getting a free switch out into the Rillaboom with active Fake Out pressure. And once again, going to start healing the Terapagos if it takes any damage in the future turn, which Chichiot has done a spectacular job of stopping. But now we see this Miraidon locked in at -5 special attack after the Parting Shot and 2 Draco Meteors. The Fake Out definitely pretty safe into the Ogerpon if you want to go for it. But at this point, with a +2 on the special defense on the Terapagos, the substitute's surely going up, if not just a very strong Terra Starstorm coming out. So very dominant position after that pivot on the Incineroar.
Yeah, you've got to imagine the combination of Fake Out into Ogerpon and a substitute here would be really powerful. This Miraidon now at -5 special attack, again without the electric terrain. Going to be doing very, very little damage to anything. Not to mention the +2 special defense boost on the Terapagos. So we haven't seen a substitute come out yet from the Terapagos on stream, but this would be a prime position for it, as Miraidon does swap out, getting rid of its special attack drops and giving it the chance to re-establish that electric terrain later on. Iron Hands will hit the field as Rillaboom immediately swaps out itself, wanting to give Chichiot the option to again override terrain. So another great swap here, especially because you do get the Intimidate off into these 2 physical attackers that Sonoru has on the field. If we do see the Focus Energy come through, though, that won't do too much in terms of the Intimidates, because again, the only attack Ivy Cudgel will be going for those critical hits, but no substitute. We're going to see another Terra Starstorm, so going straight for more damage. Now at +2 special attack, despite the Light Screen being up, starting to chip away at these 2 bulkier Pokemon.
Yeah, still notably not a 2-hit KO on the Ogerpon, so it will get the chance to go for 2 strikes potentially with the Ivy Cudgel. The Intimidate dropping the Ogerpon, although it does, It is going to be going for a critical hit through those no matter what. However, if you weren't intimidated and you went for the Terra Fire, you'd be at +1 instead of neutral, which pretty substantially adjusts how the damage goes into the Terapagos, maybe being a knockout. But at this point, even with the Terra Fire, Crit Ivy Cudgel at neutral, probably not going to be enough. But yeah, once again, we see Sisiot not bite on the Fake Out turn, switches out into his faster Fake Out Pokemon, and now just has another dominant position. So real masterclass in Fake Out cycling here.
Not only Fake Out cycling, but just making sure that Rillaboom is always there to ruin Miraidon's day. I think you called that out earlier on in Team Preview, Cedric, that being able to remove the electric terrain is a kind of a linchpin in a lot of these matchups, and keeping that Rillaboom off the field as long as Miraidon is really important. As Fake Out goes into the Iron Hands, given the Spiky Shield from the Ogerpon, there will be no attacks from Sonoru on this turn, as we get to see the Terapagos continue the barrage of damage with this Terra Starstorm. Even with, again, with the light screen up, it might be ending pretty soon in a 1 HP survival from the Iron Hands. I think that probably means the light screen was worn off prior to this turn, because that was a lot more damage than that first one.
Probably to Sonoru's detriment that it survived
True.
there.
Yeah.
Given that you'd at least finally have Miraidon in the field with no Fake Out pressure active, although, you know, you can imagine just the Rillaboom switching in and being sacked to reset the Fake Out pressure, but at this point, yeah, the Terapagos is just safe to go for a Terra Starstorm, knock out the Iron Hands if it comes in, maybe parting shot the Ogerpon, or just go for an additional damage with the knockoff. We see Ivy Cudgel, though, finally gets to do some damage, and wow, not even a 2-hit KO, even with the critical hit Ivy Cudgel as the Starstorm comes out.
Terra Starstorm will be able to knock out this Iron Hands and do a big chunk to Ogerpon. If not KO it, barely does hang on with 28 HP, but that does mean that Sonoru is down to their final 2 Pokemon, and this Incineroar has the chance to act as well. It will be the knockoff, it looks like, to confirm the final KO on the Ogerpon. And unfortunately for Sonoru, their last Pokemon is this Miraidon, and the Rillaboom is lurking in the back, ready to shut off that electric terrain and re-establish the Grassy, just to make sure that this Terapagos is taking as little damage as possible and able to fire off what will be most likely one more game-winning Terra Starstorm here.
Yeah, just a credit to Chichiot that he's able to make you say the sentence, unfortunately, the last Pokemon here is the Miraidon. Womp womp. Yeah, but yeah, just found the perfect position with the Terapagos. Gets 2 Calm Minds up, and now, yeah, the Rillaboom can come in pretty safely. You can protect or you can attack to avoid getting critical hit, maybe. But yeah, we're just going to see that Rillaboom as a pretty safe switch in, as the Miraidon is forced to lock into an attack with the Choice Specs item.
That is funny. Yeah, I think most of the time you don't mind Miraidon being your last Pokemon.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at closing
Exactly,
games out. Just unfortunately not enough given these Calm Mind boosts here. Protecting itself just to make sure, like you said, Cedric, there can be no potential for, critical hit Electro Drift through those Calm Mind boosts. We have the option to go for the Fake Out into Miraidon. If you want to play it even safer, this is a turn where you could go straight for a substitute to again eliminate any kind of critical hit chances here. But given I believe that was the Electro Drift we saw the Miraidon lock into. There's no more spread damage. You've probably got enough in the tank to weather whatever this Miraidon can throw at you. And Sonoru understands, throws in the towel, and we'll move on to game 2.
Yeah, really well played game from both players. I think Sonoru found themselves in a pretty favorable early game, having, unexpectedly catching the Terapagos going for Calm Mind as the Volt Switch came out and the Whimsicott came in with active Encore pressure. But unfortunately went for a bit aggressive play on a light screen as Sisiot went for his own aggressive play, going for an attack instead of a protect and switch to Follow Me. And ultimately Sisiot came out much more, in a better position off of that turn. So going to be back to the drawing board, or maybe you just say, okay, that went fine. It was obviously tough after that turn, but if I can just get that call or one of the many calls throughout the game a little bit more correct, we can circumvent that Terapagos from getting out of control.
You have to wonder if kind of the priority given to the focus energies in the Ogerpon is going to be something that Sonoru replicates in the second game. We saw 2 turns where the Ogerpon went for focus energy, but I think only 1 Ivy Cudgel came out between the 2 times it was on the field. So not a lot being done. And even that critical hit Ivy Cudgel did less than half to that terastallized Terapagos, which, I don't know, it doesn't seem like enough damage to be prioritizing that focus energy enough, unless, kind of like you hinted at, you can get the +1 boost with the terastallization on top of the damage boost from Terra Fire, but that's a pretty specific scenario that, again, if Heatran is brought, for example, if you terastallize, you lose that Mold Breaker, and Heatran just completely walls it out. So that's a big commitment move that could pay off, but there's also a lot of room for that to go wrong. Yeah,
we're seeing in this game 2, Sonoru seemingly a bit less confident in the game one approach, hovering over the Ferrograph, thinking, okay, the fake out cycling was really well done by Chichiot. We got to stop that. No more fake out cycling. At least force the U-turns or the attacks, but we can't just let our offensive pieces be continually, locked down like that. As we see, I believe the Ferrograph was locked in a different lead in the Whimsicott, in the Ogerpon and the Iron Hand. So going maybe a bit more aggressive in terms of damage early on instead of just Volt switching around and going for the setup.
Not only does the Ferrograph block the fake out cycling, you can also set up Trick Room that would make your Iron Hands probably be the first attacker on a given turn, which could be a big deal. And it, again, does have those 2 fighting type moves, which could heavily damage that Terapagos. You just have to worry about Intimidates now. You don't have a way to bypass Intimidate with this Iron Hands like you do with the other physical attacking Ogerpon Hearthflame. But no Intimidate just yet. We have the Rillaboom and the Terapagos lead from Chichiot next to the Ogerpon Hearthflame and Iron Hands from Sonoru. So bit of a mix-up in strategy here from Sonoru, but the pretty safe lead of Rillaboom Terapagos I think makes a lot of sense, because if the Rillaboom and Miraidon are both led, the electric terrain will be set up first and then immediately overridden by the Rillaboom. So I don't know if you could ever go wrong with this lead here.
Yeah, offering both Fake Out and Focus Energy, but critically, if Chichiot expects that it's still Whimsicott in the back and you're just thinking, okay, well, they're going to try and Encore me instead of light screening, and that's how they're going to beat me this game. If that's the expectation and you just go for Fake Out haphazardly here, and that would just leave you open to an Ivy Cudgel knocking out the Rillaboom. Going to be pretty critical what Chichiot decides to do with his Rillaboom here, as the Ferrograph is switched in on that Iron Hand slot.
Iron Hand swapped out before anything else, so it probably gives away that there are no other swaps here, and the Fake Out is blocked by the Armor Tail. Ivy Cudgel immediately comes through into Rillaboom, so great play from Sonoru to gain some momentum early on in this game. Rillaboom goes down, so there is no more grassy terrain. You only have one chance to get rid of electric terrain now, and it is that Terrestrialization, so you gotta commit pretty hard if you want to remove electric terrain later on in this game. Terapagos, though, does go straight for the Calm Mind, and again, that Terra Shell is not broken, so not a huge loss for Chichiot there, but a really, really good turn to start off this game from Sonoru to remove that Rillaboom.
Yeah, exactly. Not hating the turn one. It's not like the game is over, given that you have the Calm Mind and the Terra Shell still active. Although the Ogerpon can break through it with the Ivy Cudgel, it hasn't gotten the Focus Energy up, which is one silver lining, so it won't be doing that much, even though it is ignoring the Terra Shell. However, Chichiot, considering this next play pretty carefully, you could imagine the Incineroar coming in just to limit the Ogerpon's damage potential before it goes for Focus Energy, as well as walling out the Ferrograph pretty substantially. Has a aggressive Will-Wisp if there is a switch on Sonoru's side, but more than likely could just be a knockoff or a parting shot to redirect and, make sure that Terapagos doesn't get into a spot that it can't dig itself out of against a Trick Room Iron Hands, potentially.
The nice part about Ferrograph being on the field now as well, without the electric terrain being up, is that you can pretty freely swap it out. A lot of the time when you bring the Ferrograph in, the electric terrain is active and the electric seed will be consumed. So you get that defense boost, but that just means that you can't really swap out for the rest of the game unless you want to lose that defense boost. No swaps though, instead going straight for damage. We got the Helping Hand into the Ogerpon and the Ivy Cudgel, which will ignore Terra Shell, but still not do too much damage thanks to that Intimidate, and a Terra Starstorm comes straight into that Ogerpon Hearthflame, doing a huge chunk of damage, lowering it all the way almost down to a quarter of its HP remaining, and a parting shot coming through from Incineroar will allow Chichiot to pivot out and reveal his 4th Pokemon.
Yeah, interesting parting shot. You could imagine a pretty high value knockoff into that Ferrograph slot with no Electric Seed. Activated would have done full damage there, would have knocked out an Assault Vest on Iron Hands, it would have knocked out a Choice Specs on the Rhydon, but instead plays it safer, expects potentially an offensive switch in, and goes for the parting shot to reposition into the Ogerpon. The Ogerpon on his side and is now threatening a Ivy Cudgel knockout onto the Heartflame Ogerpon with the Terapagos. Although took some damage, that was not as much as you would expect from a Helping Hand Ivy Cudgel. Definitely a very bulky Terapagos. Now the Terapagos is just once again healing over time with the Grassy Terrain and leftovers. One Calm Mind up, and the Heartflame more or less forced to switch with a very bulky, potentially substituting in the future Terapagos. Going to be a tricky spot for Sonoru to get out of.
Yeah, the damage being so important into that Ogerpon on Sonoru's side, because it is one of the few things that can deal a big chunk of damage to Terapagos, even if that is a bit situational in nature. Follow Me does come through though, so no Ivy Cudgels, instead redirecting the attacks, making sure this Farigiraf gets the chance to attack. Power Whip comes through, so was targeting that Farigiraf for some big damage, and thanks to the double resist, it does not knock out Ogerpon, but Terra Starstorm will be more than enough. Critical hit on top of it just for fun. And I do believe we saw the Trick Room selected for Farigiraf, so a nice chance for the Iron Hands to come in here, maybe start doing some big damage, especially if you want to go for maybe this Farigiraf swapping out into that Miraidon and activating the Quark Drive ability too.
Yeah, I wonder if Chichiot was actually trying to catch the Iron Hands there. Would have done a lot of damage with the Power Whip and Starstorm combination. Probably not a knockout, but at least brings it in range of another Starstorm. Falls, loses out on a little bit of damage or setup by not going for Ivy Cudgel there, but you can see there was definitely some thought into trying to cover some option other than Follow Me. But yeah, good. Sunryu comes out of the turn a lot better than expected and now has Trick Room and the Iron Hands threatening with very powerful, super effective fighting type moves against literally all of Chichiot's remaining Pokemon.
Yeah. And the tough part about Chichiot's position here too is that if you want to switch the Incineroar in to maybe lower the attack on the Iron Hands, if you switch it into the wrong spot, it's going to take a fighting type move for its trouble, which would be another big swing of momentum for Sonoru. Because once the Incineroar goes down, you can possibly get this Iron Hands back on the field at max attack. And because the Trick Room is up, it's going to be the fastest thing on the field. And we do see, I believe, the Miraidon switching in for the Farigiraf, so Quark Drive boosted attacks from this Iron Hands could be a huge deal.
Yeah, going to be getting that Quark Drive activated on the Iron Hands, basically the equivalent of a Life Orb. Going to be doing a huge amount of damage, whether Intimidate comes in or not on one of Chichiot's Pokemon. We'll see if there's any defensive play, obviously Protect available on both Pokemon, but we do see the Ogerpon is switching out into the Incineroar, going to Intimidate the Iron Hands as, I believe it targeted a fighting type move into the Terapagos, so defended a little bit, offsetting the Quark Drive with the Intimidate, and no Protect on the Terapagos, catches the Terapagos for over a 2-hit KO, just doing a ton of damage as the Terapagos crits a attack into the Miraidon, now bringing it in range, most likely for a knockoff from the Incineroar.
Even without the critical hit there, that's probably enough damage to knock it out with the second Terra Starstorm. Even if you opt to go for something like the Fake Out into the Iron Hands this turn, well, I guess you can't really do that with Farigiraf looming in the back still, but I don't know. Actually, this became tough. You could opt for the Terrestrialization now because it is your chance to remove the Electric Terrain and remove the Quark Drive on the Iron Hands, which could be the difference in the damage dealing, like in a low kick or a Drain Punch knocking it out from here. If you're able to survive an Iron Hands attack, you're guaranteed to get that Terra Starstorm off into either the Miraidon that's stuck on the field, that would certainly be knocked out by it, or the Farigiraf swapping in, which could be the damage you need to kind of regain control in this game here.
Yeah, we see Miraidon fearing for its life from both Pokemon, switches out into the Farigiraf, potentially to block a Fake Out, as the Iron Hand's going to be going on the offensive here. Once again, no Terrestrialization used yet. In theory, you could Terra Ghost the Incineroar instead of the Terapagos. We'll see what ends up happening. I think the safer play, more traditional play, would be go for the Terra on the Terapagos, which we do see come out, not wanting to mess about, just going for a more consistent game plan. And after clearing the Electric Terrain with that, most likely going to be able to survive a Drain Punch from the Iron Hands, now only at -1 attack, no Quark Drive boost. So yeah, definitely strong play from Chichiot as the Drain Punch comes out once again and does pretty, not negligible, but substantially less than previously. And now the Will-O-Wisp on the Iron Hands is going to make sure that it never does even that much damage ever again.
Great turn for Chichiot here. We'll be able to fire off a Terra Starstorm to deal some pretty good damage to both of these Pokemon. That Will-O-Wisp going to be really huge, giving the chance another critical hit. Oh no! This damage coming through again, it looks like it might have been enough for a 2-hit KO without that critical hit, but the critical hit just kind of sealing the deal there. The Will-O-Wisp being the big factor on that turn, right? You saw the Drain Punch is already doing not too much. Even if Electric Terrain comes back up and is able to reboost the attack of the Iron Hands with the Quark Drive, might even be able to survive one, and especially, given this Farigiraf's strongest attacking option is Psychic into the... Is it +2 Terapagos at this point? You're probably not going to be able to knock it out here.
I think it might just be +1, but yeah, regardless, not going to be doing that much damage. We see the Helping Hand come out onto the Iron Hands. We see a Drain Punch strike the Incineroar for, once again, not too impressive damage after the Will-O-Wisp, healing up a bit of HP, but At this point, you might just be trying to knock out the Farigiraf and reverse sweep Sonoru in their own Trick Room with the Terapagos.
That's true. If you're able to knock out either of these two Pokemon before Trick Room runs out, you can just immediately knock out Miraidon before it gets the chance to do anything. Parting Shot does come out here, which will allow the Incineroar to come back in later on in the game. And Ogerpon comes in here, importantly, after both of Sonoru's Pokemon have acted, so Sturdy is guaranteed to remain active throughout the rest of this turn. And of course, Terra Starstorm will be enough to knock out this Farigiraf and get another big chunk of damage into Iron Hands. One more critical hit. I couldn't tell which Pokemon that was, but yeah, racking up those critical hits throughout this game and kind of making up for the lack of them from the Ogerpon and Sonoru's side, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at this point, looking pretty tricky, even if you were out of Trick Room. I'm not sure that... I mean, we know that the Ogerpon actually even outspeeds the Miraidon, so in or out of Trick Room, you have a Pokemon to take that knockout. So yeah, it's just looking like, despite, to Sonoru's credit, a lot more effort to chip down the Terapagos early, Chichiot just was one step ahead in managing the damage with Intimidate, Will-O-Wisp, Fake Out Pressure. Even getting the turn 1 knockout on the Rillaboom wasn't enough. Kind of got out of position in a way. Although you had the Ogerpon and the Farigiraf in the field, you just introduced the opportunity for the Calm Mind, Terapagos, and Incineroar to really ice you out. And as we see a forfeit lock, Sonoru realizing that there's really no way out at this point.
A really well played 2 games from Chichiot there, just showing how dominant Terapagos can be in matchups against special attacking restricted Pokemon. I think Miraidon and something like the Calyrex Shadow Rider are 2 things that it does really well against, just based on its merit of being able to bulk up with that Calm Mind and eventually start winning out on damage trades. But of course, credit to Sonoru, did make some adjustments there, especially that more offensive turn 1 that paid off really well. Just not enough to overcome the Terapagos.
Yeah, I think that's regardless of how the matchup actually is, when you're playing against Chichiot on basically his team at this point. He has gone to multiple majors and done really well with this team, as well as played it a lot in online competitions, playing the most common, or at least one of the most popular, well practiced against teams in the format, in the Miraidon team. You're definitely at an experience disadvantage there, and I think that just showed a little bit in terms of how precise Chichiot's play was in controlling the Miraidon damage. So really well played. I think that puts big win for Chichiot in allowing the Samurais to potentially progress to playoffs. Congrats to him and his team, hopefully, if they made it. And yeah, overall, really impressive match from all the players this week.
That will wrap it up for us here on week 9 of the NPA, the final week of the regular season. We will be back next week for the first round of playoffs, the semifinals, where the top 4 teams will duke it out for a spot in the championship match. I've been MajorBowman. I've had Talon with me, and we've had a great time bringing you guys some NPA action. And we're really excited for next week, and we'll see you there.